Good morning. My name is Wayne Williams. I'm the Colorado Secretary of State. With me is Gilbert Ortiz, who is the Pueblo County Clerk and Recorder. At the outset, I want to say thank you to my former colleagues here at El Paso County for making their facility available, which is kind of the halfway point between where I am and where Clerk Ortiz is, and hopefully also a convenient place for members of the media. Colorado had an election this past week that had record turnout. We had, at the last number that, as of this morning's report, 2,852,268 ballots returned. By comparison, past presidential election was 2.6 million. Our most recent election across Colorado was a coordinated election in 2015 that had 1.4 million people vote. So we had twice as many people vote in this election as the last one. This is the first presidential election using a new system adopted by the Colorado legislature in 2013, in which all Coloradans receive a mail ballot, but also have the opportunity to vote in person. I should note that we had 200,738 Coloradans that still chose to vote in person, even though the mail ballot was sent out to everyone. We continue to work to make elections better in Colorado. And when I talk about better, there are two major things that we are looking at. And the first of those is the integrity of the elections process itself. And that means that we need an election that the voters can rest assured was conducted accurately. This is, by far and away, the most important part of that process. If people don't have confidence in the accuracy of the process, then they are not confident in the basic underpinnings of our democratic republic in which we live. What that means is that for Colorado election equipment, there are rigorous standards that have to be followed. That equipment, before it's ever used, has to have a trusted build installed on it. It has to be tested, and it's tested both before and after the election, and it has to pass that test with not just a good score, but with a 100% accuracy score. There are public logic and accuracy tests that that people are notified of in the media and in the public and have the opportunity to participate in. And throughout this process, we use Democrat and Republican judges to ensure that there is always a double set of eyes. And that's true whether it's picking up the ballots from a ballot drop box or whether it's the processing that takes place of those ballots. In the course of that, Colorado is moving to a more verifiable system, a system that has a paper ballot record of every single vote that is cast. Now, some of you may have seen internet reports or videos that someone sent of someone coming in with a card from the outside and showing how an election could be modified if you had access to the machine. Well, in Colorado, we don't allow that, and we only allow a trusted build to be used. In the course of the new system that was being used in Pueblo, the initial purchase was of an express server that used a SQL Express system. In that system, there are limitations of which we were not aware at the time the purchase was made. The vendor has provided a new server and a backup server that is a higher capacity server and addresses the needs that Pueblo has. When did we find this out? Well, shortly before noon on Election Day, Pueblo began to experience some issues, and they tried to diagnose those issues, working with the people there on site. We learned about it in the early afternoon, and then sent a replacement server that had a larger capacity down from Denver. That had to have a trusted build installed, again, because we don't let anybody walk in and just put any type of program they want. And then when it reached Pueblo, it had to be tested, and we had to ensure that every bit of data was correctly transferred to the new machine. Unfortunately, that took longer than the vendor had told us it was going to take, because it's not a process they had had to do before. There were a series of layers of security that had to be gone through on a step-by-step basis, and that took longer than anyone anticipated. We sent, ultimately, folks down from the Colorado Secretary of State's office to assist. We worked with the vendor, and ultimately Pueblo was able to make that transfer and get the new system up and running after it was tested and after we were assured that all the data was accurate. The other part of the election system that is an important part, but is a secondary part, is the speed of posting results. We know that people are interested in what's going on. I have been a candidate before. I know very well how interested people are in getting quick results. But there is no circumstance under which speed trumps accuracy, and that accuracy must be the paramount objective throughout the process. So it took longer than we wanted. We're working on going forward, ensuring that every county has a sufficient server size. The larger counties than Pueblo paid for a larger server. Pueblo bought the express server because they were not aware of the limitations in size caused by a 4-page, 18-inch ballot. So 2 pieces of paper, 4 sides, 18 inches. When you scan that in, that obviously takes a lot of space, and it took more than the seller anticipated using up. And so there was this fail-safe. Instead of votes being cast that were not counted, it refused to allow anyone else to go forward, and that's what caused the delay in Pueblo. I will note the vendor has agreed to not only provide Pueblo with the upgraded server at no additional cost, but also to provide a backup for future years, and so that they have stepped up and provided these at no additional cost. We certainly regret the delay, but I will tell you the results that were released shortly after 11 o'clock were accurate. As someone who's been frustrated at times as a candidate, I understand the frustration. But the most important thing for us and for Clerk Ortiz was to ensure that those results, when released, were accurate. I'm going to turn the time over to Clerk Ortiz to make a few statements, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Secretary. I'd just like to take this moment to thank the Secretary of State's office for all the help that they gave us during this challenging time. And I like to echo a few words that he said. It's frustrating for the press, it's frustrating for the candidates, surely for the public, but as elected officials, we're standing there watching SQL Server being uploaded, and I can tell you that I don't think anybody was more frustrated on Election Day than I was. We plan these elections months and months and months ahead of time. We send plans to the Secretary of State's office to be accepted. We try to think of every scenario that things could go wrong. This was not one of the scenarios that we imagined could go wrong, and we're taking that information, taking that data, we're learning from it. We're going to work with the Secretary of State's office, and we're going to come up with better plans for future elections if a server goes down. That way we have a script. That way, if the county's server goes down, we know exactly how much time it's going to cost them. And I think it's going to help not only Pueblo elections, but every county's elections. And unfortunately, it happened in my county, and we're going to have to make those lessons learned from my county. But I think it's going to improve elections statewide now that we know that this is an issue. So once again, thanks to the Secretary of State's office. They've always been a huge help to Pueblo County, and I'll open it up for any questions.
So basically, you guys just didn't anticipate how big the ballot was, but you already know how big it was. So how did you not kind of
We,
vendor forcing this coming?
we saw that it was going to be a big ballot and that it was going to be 4 pages. The question is, nobody saw, or the issue is, nobody saw that SQL Server had a limitation for the size of the database that it was creating. So it reached its limitation, and that was the one thing that the vendor did not see as an issue.
Let me add to that if I could. On the SQL Server used a SQL Express piece of software. We were not aware of the size limitations, the capacity limitations that had the vendor. As we've reviewed the documentation, we did not see any indication of those size limitations in the data, in the documentation we received from the vendor. And so it's one of the reasons why the vendor is stepping up to correct the issue, because they did not have that in the documentation. So there was no way that Pueblo would have been aware of that information. We were not aware of that information, and we're obviously requiring that going forward. It wasn't a hard drive issue. It was the server SQL Express limitation issue, and that's the part we were not aware of. And let me explain a little bit. The new system uses a scan of the entire ballot so that judges can quickly adjudicate any race that might be in question. So if you initially said, no, I'm not going to vote for that tax increase, and then when you got more data, you said, well, I want to change my mind, and so you crossed out the no and wrote in yes, and then wrote not this one, or you wrote an arrow saying this one. This is all scanned in by the machine so that the bipartisan team of judges can quickly adjudicate what the voter meant. In past systems and the other systems in place, individuals were not the individual bipartisan team of judges wasn't able to look at the one race. They had to go through and completely create a new ballot that duplicated every single vote. That is the difference that this system does. So in the long run, it is a much better system, much faster, but it does have that capacity issue. There were a large number of ballots being duplicated on a 4-page system, or being adjudicated rather, and that's what took the additional capacity. I've been in contact with the vendor. My staff has been in contact with the vendor. Clerk Ortiz and his group actually had on-site support from that vendor, but this is not something they had happen in any other county, in any of the places it had been deployed. It did not happen in any of the prior elections that occurred. And so this was our first time we'd experienced that issue.
Well, since it's been fixed, what's been taking the time now, the 2 extra days since it's been fixed, that you're still counting votes?
Well, you know, the 8 hours that we weren't counting votes during the election had to be made up. And what happened on election night is when the server was back up, we started and we went until 3 o'clock in the morning, and unfortunately, computers don't get tired, but judges do. And as you know, the Secretary has said, accuracy is our most important challenge that we want to make sure happens, and we want to make sure that every vote is counted properly. And so I have to make decisions on when people and judges are getting too tired and maybe the accuracy level of their work isn't at its highest peak. And so I've had to do that in two different times this week. We want to make sure that every ballot is counted correctly, and so sending the judges home to recharge overnight last night was a decision I had to make, and it was an unpopular decision for sure for the press and for some candidates, but you know, my duty as an elected clerk is to make sure that every vote counts accurately.
Let me just add to that a little bit. You're probably aware that Colorado law does not make anything official that happens on election night or the next day. There are a number of reasons for that. Individuals who have a signature that does not match have the opportunity to correct that until 8 days after the election. I know this. My daughter got one of those. It's from me when I was clerk here, saying your signature doesn't match. You have until 8 days after the election to make it good. Military ballots, overseas ballots have until 8 days after the election to arrive, so long as they were mailed by the election day. So there are no final results until after those ballots arrive and a canvass occurs. So while we work hard to provide people additional information that's not required by the law, it is not something that you would say is more important than the accuracy of that process. I would note that Pueblo is not the only county that is still in the process of counting a few ballots that are left. Other counties up and down the Front Range also have some additional ballots that they have either not processed yet or are finishing the processing of today. And so that's not a unique thing with Pueblo. As I noted at the beginning, we have never had over 2.6 million mail ballots returned. The prior record was about 1.9 million. And so this 50% increase in the number of mail ballots has caused some processing issues with our county clerks. Going forward, we're going to be working with the Clerks Association and the county clerks and the legislature to say, are there ways to make this process better? It's our first presidential. And so we saw that, and I'll do a side note on in-person voting here. We had never had anywhere near this people who voted in person. 4.8% voted in person during the gubernatorial election. We cleared 7% voting in person in this election. Those additional people choosing to vote caused some polls not to have everyone finished by 7 p.m., as many of you are aware. And so we continue to work to say, how can we make this process better? We have a bipartisan election advisory committee that will be working on that members from the Democratic Party, the Republican Party both serve on, and we're going to continue to try to make sure these processes work accurately and work conveniently for the voter.
So is this the only county that faced these server problems? This is the first time ever that a county in Colorado has faced these server problems?
That is correct. This is the only county that impacted. All of the larger counties went with the larger server. The smaller counties than Pueblo did not have this issue arise. Pueblo happened to be small enough that the vendor's belief was that that would be sufficient for them. That was incorrect. And so, as I said, that vendor has given them not just a upgraded server, but also a backup with no cost to the taxpayers of Pueblo County.
I just want to make sure. So the server was that you guys at Pueblo were using was too small in terms of the size?
The server software that it used, SQL Express, was insufficient to handle the size. The upgraded server uses SQL as opposed to SQL Express. And if you get much more than that, Eric, my ability to know details of software configurations is limited by the Computer Science 103 class that I took 30 years ago.
What's the ultimate message to assure that every Colorado voter can have their vote counted accurately, fairly, and...
So I think the ultimate message is this. First, no voter had their ability to cast a vote impacted by the fact the counting was delayed. And so voters still had the ability to drop off those mail ballots. What was delayed was the processing of those. The second and the most important and the paramount thing, if that's not enough redundancy for you, the most paramount issue is, of course, accuracy. And we made sure that every vote was counted accurately, that the process of transferring the data from the limited server to the upgraded server was done without any loss of data, and we tested that server to ensure that every vote was recorded exactly as that voter wanted. And so when those final results are released after the canvass that takes place in another week or two, those results are going to be accurate. Those results are going to have every single vote counted, and every single vote counted the way it was supposed to be.
How many ballots remain uncounted right now?
We have about around 2,000 mail ballots to be processed and over 4,000 in-person ballots to be processed. We expect that we will be done by 5:30 tonight, and all that will be left to be processed are the signature discrepancy ballots, UOCAVA ballots or Uniformed Overseas Voters ballots, and any other ballots that have to be researched or have any other issues like missing signatures or household swaps where a husband and a wife sign each other's ballots. So those kinds of things take more time, and those will be left till right at the 8-day cutoff where we stop counting ballots after the 8th day. But today we will count all the ballots that were cast on election day that went through the validity process, and so we're excited to get that done today.
How many thousands of voters would you say was valid, were affected by the issues in Pueblo on election day?
I don't think any voters were affected by the issues, and I think that's an important point that we're trying to make today is this did not affect or disenfranchise any voters in Pueblo County.
So that's probably a better question directed for Clerk Brewer, but our focus really hasn't been on El Paso County. I do know this. There were more drop boxes that were added after I left El Paso County. As Secretary of State, I actually paid for one of those drop boxes, so I know they took place. I think looking at a presidential election, they continued to make adjustments in their spacing. El Paso County had the advantage that when the Citizen Service Center was built a few years ago, the entire second floor was an empty shell. And so El Paso was able to design their space for the modern election system, for the process that Colorado uses. It was a system that allowed us to put large windows so the public could observe the process before. And even if they're not an official watcher, they could come in and watch what's going on. So those processes took place. I know we moved to a split shift. As Clerk Ortiz commented, there were issues if you ask our election judges, some of whom are not in their 20s, to work for 14-hour days repeatedly. And so we shifted to a split shift, but we had the space and capacity to make that work. But El Paso County continues to work on making improvements, and they look at each one. Obviously, the Fort Carson office was added this time. In talking with Clerk Broerman, they were surprised by the number of voters at the Fort Carson facility. They had anticipated, I think, that many members of the military would continue to be registered in places where they don't have to pay income tax. Colorado, unlike some other states, charges income tax to its military members, and so I know the Fort Carson facility had a lot more people than we had ever anticipated. That office had just been opened, so there was no prior election to base it on. But I know each county in the state goes back and does kind of an after-action review and say, how can we make this process better? How can we try and minimize the number of people who were in line? As a state, one of the things we have to do is look at how to make the process of melding same-day registration with in-person voting work. The numbers I have at this point are we had about 18,000 people across the state of those 200,000 who came in, and we had to completely enter every bit of data for them because they were new registrants or re-registrant. We had another 25,000 voters who were updating data. Well, obviously, if you have to do that, that's a process that is not as quick as simply, here's your ballot, ma'am. And so we have to figure out how to make that process better.
As you know, we have over 4,000 in-person ballots to process today, so that's how many people voted in person. I would say it was in the 3,500 range on election day. We had 3,500. But if I tweeted yesterday, we got all of the paperwork from all of the polling locations, and we put it in a pile of registrations, change of name, change of address, change of affiliation, first-time voter registrations. We put them in a pile to show this is what had to be updated before the person voted in line on election day. So We want to make sure that if you've moved from House District 47 in Pueblo to House District 46, that your voter registration is updated so that we're giving you the right ballot and you're voting on the issues of your new residents. And I think now that we have this data and we've been through a presidential election, the Secretary of State's office, the County Clerks Association, and every single clerk in the state of Colorado are going to go back to that data, and we're going to learn from this experience, and we're going to come back 4 years from now with a new system, with the same system, but with tweaks to make sure that lines are prevented. And I think one of the most important things we can take from this election is voter education needs to be ramped up in Colorado, and we need to think about how we're getting the citizens educated on our changes. On election day, on the day before election day, I chose to man the phones in elections department to see what the issues were out in the public, and people were still asking me, "Do I vote at my precinct? Where is my precinct?" Rather than thinking that they could go to any voter service and polling center. Somehow we didn't get them the information and the change of our system. Somehow we didn't make them aware that the mail ballot or the ballot was coming in the mail. I'm putting it on me in Pueblo County that I'm going to go out there. I'm going to work very hard to do voter education between now and 2 years from now, the next time we have an all-mail ballot election. And I'm going to find a way to get the whole public used to voting that mail ballot, used to using our online voter registration system, Go Vote Colorado, to update their information. We're currently using national change of address to update their information, so when they move and they change their information with the Postal Service, we're updating that information. So, all of us together, we're going to look at this data, we're going to work very hard to make elections even better than they are here in Colorado.
Are you confident this won't happen again?
Let me add to the first question first. So we run a report every morning. We issue that in the Colorado Secretary of State's office. We had about 2.2 million voters as of the report that ran election morning. We finished with more than 2.8 million voters. So you had over 600,000 people whose ballot was turned in on election day, either in person or via mail. That's a significant number. And remember that we had in-person voting for 14 days. One of the things we'll be looking at, those polling places were mostly empty for most of those 14 days, and then they were overwhelmed on the last day. And so we need to look at the numbers we have beforehand and shift resources to where they are needed, which is we have people who want to wait till the last minute, and we need to make adjustments to that. Education's part of that. One of the improvements we're making is the new Colorado Drive system is going to make it easier for people to register at the time they get their driver's license. That will auto-populate the data then so that we get that, and we hopefully have fewer same-day registrations, which really do bog down that process. So even though you can same-day register, if we can get people to register ahead of time, that makes it easy. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible. You can go to govotecolorado.com and do it. You can text CO to vote. So you can text to get that process started. You'll be able to do it very easily with a driver's license. Let me answer your question. Are we confident? Go ahead.
Yeah, you're confident that a server like this won't go away again?
We are confident that now that we know the limitations of the server, that we're going to be steering counties to make decisions for purchase based on what they need and what they need in the system that exists now. So we would not advise in the future a county of Pueblo size to make a purchase of a system that uses the Express SQL system. Having said that, anytime you have electronic equipment, it fails at times. There is nothing that lasts forever or with 100%. And so our first criteria in every instance is going to be making sure it's working accurately. And if it isn't, we're going to get that equipment replaced. I think we are going to work on better processes for this to happen. And talking with the vendor, they had never had the issue come up before. And so they didn't know all of the layers of security they would have to go through, both to take the data out of the one and put the data into the next. And that was a long process that took place. And so we'll work on improvements for that. Am I sure that an electronic piece of equipment will never have a problem? No. Am I sure we're going to make sure it works right before it's ever used to count votes? Absolutely.
Just so I know, just to reiterate, I'm sorry, forgive me, I was in Denver on Tuesday, this is going on. Again, you say it was the server issue, being the software too small to handle those large ballots, some of those 4 fake ballots coming in, correct?
The SQL Express that was used on the smaller server was insufficient to handle the large number of ballots that were being adjudicated, given the size of the ballot. We were not aware of the issue before the election took place. We were not aware at the time the purchase was made. We have since followed up with the vendor to ensure that doesn't happen again.
Mr. Ortiz, I have kind of the same question for you. You said there was no one more frustrated than you were on election day. So moving forward, where does your confidence level lie in this server both on today and next elections?
And like the Secretary said, you know, confidence in electronic systems is hard to come by with election clerks. And so having a backup plan and a contingency plan is the most important thing now. So if this server does go down in the future, or for, it could go down for electronic reasons, or it could go down for software reasons. I think with the backup server that we have now, we'll have that contingency plan in place. And so my confidence is going to go up. But I can tell you the confidence I had going into this election in the server was very high because we'd used it in the primary election. And there's a reason why we bought it before the primary, so that we could test it in an election situation to make sure everything worked. Not only the server, but all the equipment that we purchased from Dominion. So, you know, I was very confident going into elections, and my employees will remind me that how incredibly confident I was, because I said, I'm going to let all of you go at 10:30 when we're done, you know, scanning in the last mail ballots at 10:30 on election night. So my confidence level was very high. I think now that this issue has happened, now that we have a backup system for contingency, I'm very confident again in the system and look forward to using it next year in the coordinated election.
Do you expect it to be done at 10:30 on election night? So basically, this has delayed you 2 days.
Yes, it has. Mm-hmm. And like the Secretary said also, you know, we always count ballots for 8 days after the election. So this is part of the election process, and I don't think we would have had the same numbers of ballots on the second day after the election to process. But we still would have had outstanding ballots even today if the system had worked properly.
And that's because of those military ballots, those provisional ballots, everything else coming in.
Signature, yeah, the in-person ballots, the signature discrepancy ballots, those things.
But the main batch of ballots, you expect it to be done?
The mail ballots, we expected to be done on election night.
What's your total number of ballots that have been counted so far?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but it is on pueblovotes.com. And but I could tell you over 80,000 people voted in Pueblo County, which is a record also for us.
Thank you all for coming out
Thank
today.
you.
And again, thanks to El Paso County for letting us use their facility, and appreciate Dave Rose and his people who helped set this up. So thanks.